And we are live. Welcome to CoralCon 2021, everyone. I hope you're as hyped up about CoralCon as I am, also from the music in the last minutes that probably helped. I'm Johannes, chairman of Correlate, and I'm very happy to introduce you all to the CoralCon this year. We have a fantastic program prepared for you in the next 2 days, where we talk about all things data for good. And yeah, we hope not only to give you great input with all our great speakers, but also form some connections maybe in the digital space. This is our second year now with the Digital CoralCon, thanks to Corona, but it also introduced us to this new format of doing like this online conference, which I think also has a lot of benefits as we can reach a lot more people with our program, and yeah, experiment with new techniques and methods of bringing you all together. So I'm really excited for the weekend. And yeah, I also have the honor to start with a little opening keynote on impact measurement. I'm really excited about that. But before we get into that, some organizational things we want to tell you about. So some public service announcements first. So we're here on this platform Hopin, where we have different areas. Basically, we have the stage where we are now, where we have our keynotes and like the events that are running, like where only one is running at the same time. Then we have the sessions. They work more like Zoom meetings, as everyone is now aware of how they work. Should be no different, but hopefully a lot more fun than your average Zoom meeting. Then we have networking sessions, also the possibility of individual meetings and direct messages, and of course the Q&A tab for your questions. Then everything on the stage and most sessions on Friday and Saturday are recorded, so we can make that available to you afterwards as well. And people who couldn't join this weekend, if you use Twitter, we have 2 official hashtags, that is CoralCon21 or just CoralCon. So you can tweet about what's happening here. And yeah, if you need to find anything, you can always go back to the reception area of Hopin, where you can also see what is going on right now and then just jump into it. Let's talk about communication shortly. At Correlate, it's very important for us that we always use appreciative language, especially when people give talks, moderate a session, organize the conference in the background. There's so much love and dedication that went into making this. So yeah, whenever you talk to someone from the organizing team, please do let them know that they're doing a great job, and yeah, just show your appreciation. If we disagree on some points, that of course is completely all right, but then we should try to use a respectful and polite language, as we want to be as constructive as possible. Yeah, and generally be respectful of each other, and which brings me also to our next point, our code of conduct, which is obviously not debatable at all. We are a harassment-free environment. We offer a harassment-free environment here. So anything like racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, ableism is not tolerated here. And if there are any comments like that, we will delete them immediately. If you want to review our code of conduct, you can go to our website. We also have the code of conduct here on Hopin, which you find over the reception area. And yeah, if there should be any violations of our code of conduct, if you encounter anything like that or see something like that, please do reach out to Nina via mail, for example, nina.h@correlate.org, and yeah, we will treat the issues confidentially. And yeah, we really want to make sure that it's a great environment for everyone attending, and that we can have all a lot of fun together talking about data for good. This brings me to the point by thanking our sponsors who made this possible. This is first of all Codecentric, which is a consulting company with over 10 locations all over Germany. And Codecentric helps companies to act sustainably, quickly, and flexibly on the market, and enables them to make their IT value chain stable, secure, available at all times. It's a great organization, and we're very grateful that they're supporting our mission with Correlate and this event. And second of all, thank you very much to the R Bootcamp, a Swiss-based company with data scientists with a combined knowledge of 25 years in R. And the R Bootcamp offers R courses, R consulting. And it's also a great organization because they share the R community's open philosophy, which is why you find all their materials online. So go check that out and contact them if you want. Thank you very much again to our sponsors. It's great to have you on board for this CorrelCon. Well, and that brings me right into it, to the little keynote, little input on measuring impact. It's a very important topic for me. I love to talk about it. It was very hard to condense it into 20 minutes. But I think it's a very important topic that is there are like so many different perspectives on it. What impact is, what social impact is, how do you measure it, why organizations should do it, how they should do it, so many perspectives. So I try to take a step back and look a bit on measuring impact more from an academic perspective of where the idea of measuring impact originally came from, and then see how this notion of measuring impact from the academic world can help nonprofit organizations and navigate the topic. Just to give you some points to think about, some reference points, and hopefully give you some inspiration of what you can also apply in your organization or as a data scientist apply when helping nonprofit organizations. So to start, I thought about picking an example of a program that runs very well and that evaluated their impact in a very rigorous fashion, and is a great example for an impactful organization. But then I thought maybe we should start with a different route and talk first about why it's important that we should evaluate our impact. And there's the example of Scared Straight. And it was a documentary in the 70s, so also won an Academy Award. And it's about a program in prisons where offending youth, so young people who committed an offense once were sent to prison, and then the idea was basically to scare them about the harsh reality of prison, and to tell them how hard it is, and that they are not strong enough to survive in this environment, and basically by that trying to deter them from any further offenses. And this documentary basically shows one of those sessions where everyone screams at those teenagers and children, and the inmates tell their horrible stories from prison. And in the documentary in the 70s, they said, yeah, this program is working very well. So basically, none of the people, the teenagers who participated in that program, actually committed an offense again. So after this documentary, there were like a range of programs rolled out in the US, like trying similar approaches to youth delinquency, and everyone thought it works, and it's a good program to prevent crime. But then several studies came out and looked at what is really the effect of this program. And in 2000, in the early 2000s, there was a very comprehensive study released and then updated in 2013, which combined like several studies on that topic. And not only did they find that the program didn't work, if you compare the people who participated to a control group, but it actually led to more offending behavior. So it was an intervention that was not only not helping at all, it was also actually harmful to the community. And so Scared Straight is a really good example of like why it's important to measure impact and to evaluate not only if your program actually does something good, but also if it actually is doing something bad. So it's really important to look into like what effects your program, your organization has on a deeper level and a more rigorous level than maybe just like listening to some anecdotes, speaking to some people, but more on a comprehensive level, look at the impact and the effects. And this, leads me to the fundamental question basically of impact evaluation, which is, does X have an effect on Y? Does our program, our organization, our intervention, does it have an effect on some outcome Y? And the why is sometimes can be an outcome, like in the example of Scared Straight, it was crime rates among youth. But the why can also be like something that we care about in our organizations. So this is the question we try to answer with impact evaluation, right? But this leads us to a problem because to answer the question, does our X, our organization, our program, our intervention, does it have a causal effect on Y? We have to ask two questions. And first is, what if X happened and what if X didn't happen? And because we can basically never say we had an effect if we can't really observe like what would have happened otherwise. And this is called the fundamental problem of causal inference, because in our world, we can only observe one state at a time, right? We can only observe a teenager who went through the program and one who didn't go through the program, but not at the same time. And this fundamental problem of causal inference is, I think, the biggest problem in measuring our social impact. It's so hard to say what is our causal influence on some variable. In evidence-based medicine, they started using randomized controlled trials to tackle this problem of those potential outcomes you cannot observe, which is actually quite a neat way of estimating a causal impact by randomizing people to two groups, a treatment group and a control group. And through the randomization, where basically all the factors are allocated quite equally among the groups, you can then compare the outcomes, which gives us an idea of the effect of the program. And this is something that works very well in medicine, where we often have like very specific outcomes that we can measure very well. But is often much harder in like a more complex social environment that most organizations operate in. And nevertheless, it is often like the standard we try to get to when we evaluate impact, because randomized controlled trials are one of the best tools we have to answer this question. What would have happened if we didn't do this intervention? So now that I gave you a very bad example with Scale Straight, I also want to give you an example of very good intervention, which is actually one of my favorite studies. So maybe that's a bit weird. Some people talk about other things, but I have my favorite evaluation studies, which have a great research design and very, very clever design of measuring impact. And this study by Zell et al. In 2006 was about an intervention in Medellin in 2004. And Colombia at that point was at a turning point. There was like a lot of disarmament of the militias, and there was some political change. But it was still quite a high rate of homicides and violent crimes in Colombia and Medellin. So one idea of them was to build out the infrastructure in the city, so that like the neighborhoods are better connected to the inner city, which creates more wealth in the whole city and builds up social capital in the whole city. And they built those cable cars because like Medellin is like there's a valley in the middle, and then the neighborhoods are on like hills around it. So they thought they would build like cable cars that connects those neighborhoods to the center. And what was really interesting about that was that they actually randomly chose the neighborhoods they connected with cable cars, which kind of created this situation like you would in a randomized controlled trial. And then through a cohort study, they observed different outcomes in trust in the police, social capital, violent crime rates, homicides. And then they evaluated after some time, like what were the outcomes of this intervention. And they actually found that the decline in homicide rate was 66% greater in intervention neighborhoods compared to the control neighborhoods. And overall reports of violence decreased by 75% in the intervention neighborhoods. And it's a great study. I highly recommend checking it out because it's a really great example of a natural experiment where you used this idea of randomized control trials, but in a natural situation where you normally would think you cannot really like randomize those interventions quite very well. If we look at this idea of randomized control trials and this kind of evidence and causal inference, we often talk about like a hierarchy of evidence. So not every research design, not every evaluation gives us the same kind of information. So in evidence-based medicine, it's this pyramid of evidence is quite common, where you basically rank studies or information from evaluations on like how good the quality of information is. And as we see here, like small case studies and cross-sectional studies are at the bottom because it's very hard to infer a causal relationship from those studies. And if we go up, we get to randomized control trials. And even above them, we have meta-analyses and systematic reviews, where the idea is you do a lot of randomized control trials and then in different situations with different people, and then combine the evidence, different studies, so that you can get like a really good overview over the intervention and its effects in different situations. But this is a very narrow view of impact evaluation, right? It's you put very much your faith in those quantitative methods of evaluating if an intervention worked or not. And it's also like a philosophical question, right? If that is what constitutes social impact for you. There are some like communities that really go down this road in the nonprofit sector, where they say, okay, every organization, every intervention should be randomized controlled in a trial, and we need this like hard evidence. And without it, we cannot say anything about the impact at all. And An example is givewell.com, for example. It's a great website where they collect like organizations that are evaluated rigorously, often with randomized control trials, and they use that to give information on or give you ideas to which organizations you can donate, and then they basically through some modeling can give you an idea like €1 to this organization will improve that many lives, right? And they can do that through this rigorous way of evaluating. But it's not uncontroversial, right? It's very heavily skewed towards this very quantitative way of assessing impact and doing good. So I want to also give you a different perspective on impact measurement and evaluation, and that is the realist view of evaluation. And there, we don't only ask the question, does the program work? We ask what works for whom, in what circumstances, and why. And it's a more holistic way of looking at a program, an organization, or an intervention that where we basically say, okay, we have so many influences on a situation, on a challenge. It's very hard to isolate the one causal thing that changes everything. So we should take the context much more into account, and that's why we basically have to build a theory for our challenge at hand and look at all the influences on the problem and our contributions. And yeah, then try to answer those questions, like what works for whom, what are the circumstances around it, and most importantly, what is also often ignored in randomized control trials, the why. Why does it work? What are the processes in the intervention that are good? What are the processes that might not work? And takes a much closer look at what's actually going on. So because of that, because it's much more complex, there's this joke that realist evaluators are going to evaluate your program, but then in the end they cannot tell you if it works or not. They can just give you like an idea. But I think in reality, and especially if you're dealing with very complex social challenges, it's the more honest perspective on impact evaluation. So what does that mean specifically? If you want to do a realist evaluation of your organization, you should always start with a theory of change. The theory of change is probably something that a lot of people have heard of in the nonprofit sector. And it's basically where you formalize how your organization works through what are your inputs, and then what are your activities, what kind of outputs do you have in your organization, and to what outcomes does it lead, and ultimately what impact does it have on maybe on the level of society. So this is, I think, like most people have seen this kind of theory of change already. But you can also drill down a bit more in this theory of change and build something called an outcomes hierarchy. So if you drill down in the outputs and activities and outcomes, you actually see that your outcomes are actually like a series of outcomes that are interrelated. So you have like intermediate outcomes, and those intermediate outcomes lead to other outcomes, which lead to other outcomes again. And this is actually very helpful to look at processes and mechanisms in your organization, how you create change, because it makes the evaluation much more manageable if you can look at like smaller parts of the organization rather than like having the aim of constructing this huge causal chain from like your activities to societal change. So this would be the first recommendation. Absolutely do build a theory of change of your intervention or program and look at the mechanisms and build up your assumptions and hypotheses about what is actually happening. So to conclude my little input here, Some recommendations maybe for realist evaluation practice, and what in my experience is very helpful when evaluating impact. So first of all, I already said that build a theory of change of the organization, the program, or intervention. Try to measure outcomes rather than impact. With outcomes, I mean like outcomes that you want to create in the community you serve, or the specific people you want to serve. Outcomes are also often hard to measure, but much easier to measure in many cases than like some impact indicators in the society at large. Build hypotheses. After building your theory of change, construct hypotheses on like how the different activities and outcomes are related. How does one outcome lead to another outcome? Because these hypotheses are then testable. And that's what the realistic evaluation is basically about. We don't think we can evaluate the whole thing, but we can test as many hypotheses as possible in this bigger theory of change. Focus on causal change that you can actually observe. While it would be nice to assess basically our impact on society or policy making or systems change, it would be really nice to actually like measure like what is the impact of my organization on that, but that's really hard. And so often it's better to focus on like smaller causal chains. Like for example, if you want to reach like systemic change in some area, it would be better if you could evaluate first, okay, like the people that I reach, can I actually convince them of something? Does their attitude change, for example? That would be an outcome we could observe. And through this theory of change, where we evaluate all our assumptions and hypotheses, we can build this larger construct, which then tells the story of we are actually impacting society. Don't forget to test mechanisms and the smaller things. I think that's like something what we often do with Correlate rather than evaluating the organization as a whole. We try to test mechanisms and smaller parts of the organizations and try to improve smaller parts of this theory of change where we see challenges always in the back of our mind, then making the whole thing better and increasing the social impact of the organizations we work with. Apply Occam's razor. That means the simpler the explanation, the better. And basically, try not to use too many assumptions in your work, because I often see when like organizations evaluate or like tell the story of their impact, there are so many assumptions in that are not testable. So try to cut down on assumptions or like test the assumptions rather than do some like super intricate modeling with like a lot of assumptions, which might lead to a great story, but like tell you very little about how your organizations actually work and what impact you have. Last but not least, speak to people. I think that's the most important thing when your goal is to understand your impact and how your organization works. And that's often something that's forgotten when we talk about quantitative impact measurement. Everything is quantitative, and we have our indicators and we have our outcomes. But like when you have many conversations with people you're benefiting, or people who actually work in or like delivering the programs, you can learn so much about the mechanisms and what works and what doesn't work. And we should never forget with all the talk about social impact evaluation that this might be actually the most helpful thing to improve our organizations and then create more impact. So it's a huge topic. Actually, studied this whole year when I did my master's in Oxford in evidence-based social intervention and policy evaluation. It was like 1 year on just about evaluation and social impact measurement. And there's so many perspectives, so many facets of it. But just want to give you this little input of, maybe think a bit differently about impact evaluation and how you can apply it to your organization. And with that thought, I will leave you to the rest of the evening. We will see each other again, hopefully in a bit more than an hour for a panel on data for good in the German social sector. But now we have some showcases where you can see some data for good in action. And I will give over to Fried.